when we hear the word trauma is, I think, a very broad spectrum thing, and if you speak of trauma and there's no real understanding of it, people just immediately shut down saying, I've never really experienced trauma, so it doesn't affect me. Where in its essence, there is, I don't think, one person, including Yeshua, that did not experience trauma. So understanding trauma and learning to identify trauma in your own body and in your soul and in your spirit can really equip you with noticing it and then growing from that and building resilience. Because essentially, if something happened to you that caused trauma, you can't undo what happened. I mean, if you've had the experience, you've had the experience. It's not something that can just be written out of your life. Oftentimes people say, but I can't remember it happened, so technically I've healed from it. That is scientifically not true, because it did happen to you. You just, if there was a suppression of the memory or the emotional responses from it, then that caused a cascade in the body and in the soul dimension to actually show that it was just suppressed. It was never really healed from. So I really do have a heart to, for myself, understand what trauma is and then to just try and explain it. So just, I think a short definition of what trauma is and how it can be understood is that trauma isn't what happened to you. It is the result that happens inside of you as a sorry, let me just rephrase that. It is what happens inside of you as a result of what happened to you. So generally, trauma can be experienced in one of three ways: too much, too soon, it's too much too fast; too little for too long; or too much for too long. So that is basically the three criteria of how trauma can be experienced. And just that is your main heading, and then there's subheadings below that as to how what kind of trauma you get. There is I think a clinical term what they would use, saying there's big T traumas and there are small T traumas. Now, my partner in the workshops, the stress resilience workshops that I do, Lana, we were prepping for a workshop the other day, and she actually says she hates that terminology, because you can't say there's big T traumas and then small T traumas, because trauma is trauma, whether it was something very intense that happened very quickly and basically shocked you and caused an immediate dissociation, or prolonged negligence or abandonment or rejection. You can't really weigh it on a scale as to what is big T trauma and what is a small T trauma, because ultimately it is trauma. So we are sort of refuting that definition of saying there are big T's and small T's. But I am going to give it just a bit of a separation of the two, because my heart is and my hope is that Abba would really come and show to each of us where there might be things in our soul dimension that needs addressing and needs to even maybe resurface in order for it to actually be healed. So I want to do two criteria specifically related to the soul and the spirit. Next week, I'm going to try and keep my focus to not go to the body, because I've got a very big passion as to how it starts manifesting from the body. But we'll comprehensively do that next week. So you get your PTSD, your post-traumatic stress disorder. And that normally comes when you have experienced or witnessed a very traumatic event. So that could be any sort of sexual abuse, that happened instantly, like you it wasn't an interpersonal thing, it just a stranger out of nowhere, abduction, stuff like that, a car accidents, a murder, any sort of violence that you have witnessed, that can cause post-traumatic stress disorder. And obviously a very common field of people that would experience this would be your soldiers. If they were, any sort of combat that people were in, you would often hear they would say the police force or the combat, the soldiers, the army, they have post-traumatic stress disorder just because of the violence that they constantly witness. But then you get your complex trauma. And complex trauma is interpersonal trauma that occurs repeatedly over time. So that is normally the interpersonal relationships. That could be if you were in a very abusive household when you grew up, in a very abusive relationship with your parents. It could be any sort of negligence coming from your parental figures in your life, or broken relationships with them, which I think a lot of our complex traumas comes from our childhood. I just want to put it out there, not to be accusational towards any parental figure. Oftentimes they also did not know how to heal with their own traumas, or to deal with their own triggers and traumas, and it sort of just, it sort of gets dumped onto the kids unknowingly. There are obviously your circumstances where there are severe abuse or neglect or abandonment, rejection, stuff like that. Any sort of marriage or narcissistic abusive relationships, friendships that could be narcissistic abusive, stuff like that would all cause complex trauma. So I think the main thing that trauma, any sort of trauma, whether it's PTSD or complex trauma, causes in the soul dimension, and I've really had extensive experiences testing this theory and really seeing that there's truth to it, is it causes a fragmentation or a dissociation in the soul's dimension. So, when I think, I'm not a clinical psychologist, so but the psychology and a psychiatry behind it, they often just address surface level things, because they very rarely would draw in the spiritual aspect of who a person is. So they push the spirit side to one side because it's very controversial. Not everyone is saved, maybe not everyone believes in the same thing. So they would push that aside, and then they would focus on what happens in the mind. And then just, if you have any sort of manifestation of that, and that I want to say depression or anxiety attacks. So they compartmentalize things, trying to just address that. Where I really believe, and Abba has shown that because we are a trinity in ourselves, you cannot address the one aspect of your humanity and not look at the other two as well. You cannot look at only someone might be experiencing anxiety attacks, and then we only focus on how to ground them in an anxiety attack. The reason there's an anxiety attack is because something is not in shalom in the soul dimension, and it gets spilled over into the spiritual dimension. So it really is a three-way, or a trinity, that you have to look at all three of them. And the hopes are, because oftentimes the body would be the last to start to portray trauma that has been suppressed. So if anything, my hope is always that if we can equip people, if we can build a resilience to when we experience any sort of negative situation, if we can create a strength within ourselves, find that strength and bravery, then we can prevent that from spilling into the body. Because the body showing trauma would be illnesses that, any autoimmune illness, cancers, anxiety, depression, stuff like that is only the fruit of what is really happening in the soul and the spiritual dimension. So the dissociation and the fragmentation happens in the soul dimension. So when there is any sort of trauma that you have experienced, our soul has this unique mechanic, I want to say coping mechanism, to dissociate from that experience. And I, in my own definition of trauma, added with what I've just said, I feel trauma is any experience that does not portray the perfect love of God to you. Because our spirits were in Him before the foundations of the earth. So the spirit man inside of us knows the fullness of God's goodness, that he is gracious, that he is kind, that he is sovereign, that he is just. And in the spiritual realm, before we were, born into the earth, we were not aware of fallen natures. It wasn't in our comprehension, in our spirit's comprehension, because we were in the fullness of his glory. And then we are birthed into the earth and we become aware of fallen nature. So our soul dissociates, because if we experience something that is very traumatic, it wants to defend, it wants to protect us. So the soul has a mechanic to dissociate from time and the experience and maybe even the person that is doing that to you. I want to say fragments from the main part of the soul in order to protect us. So if you experience a lot of trauma throughout your life, a lot of experiences, or there are a lot of broken interpersonal relationships, eventually the soul becomes so dissociated because there were too many things and there was never a chance to really heal and come back into unison and back into shalom in Abba. So then we have, in very severe and advanced cases, we have your DID, dissociative identity disorders. You get your multiple personality disorders, your bipolar disorders. All of that is actually just a very clear fruit of extreme trauma that the soul has had to endure, and that dissociation has caused such an effect that everything, that whole person's humanity, starts to become dissociated with their presence, with relationships, with who they truly are, with the truth of who God is. And I think that also understanding trauma and understanding fragmentation and dissociation like this gives us grace, or it should give us some grace to extend that to people that do suffer from multiple personality disorders or schizophrenia or bipolarism. I mean, we might not condone their actions and behavior, because it can often be very harmful to other people and just cause a rollout of more trauma towards other people. But I think it does sort of cultivate a grace in your heart that this was not something that they themselves have chosen. It is also just a fruit and result of some severe trauma that they've experienced. So looking at the soul's dimension, in preparing for this and some of the other workshops, Abba has given me 2 source texts. And I want to just separate the two. So we're first going to look at the heart. In Proverbs 23:7, God says, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. So your belief system sits in your heart space, your heart's dimension, not in your mind, not in your head or your understanding. The belief system sits in the heart. And I was tested last year, specifically regarding to in regards to this. I was challenged in my heart as to certain promises of God and just certain characteristics of who he is. I didn't doubt him, but I was challenged in my relationship with him. Do I trust him fully? And my mind and my mouth says, yes, I trust Yahweh. He's good. I trust Yeshua. He's good. I believe that. But when he challenged my heart, I realized every space of my heart might not really be convinced of that. I want to believe that. I want my whole heart to believe that. But when he challenged me on it, I realized there are certain parts of my heart that do not trust him, because I struggle to surrender things to him. I didn't want to, some life decisions or future hopes, dreams, plans. I didn't want to fully surrender it to him, because something in me wasn't quite sure. If I do surrender this, then I release my hands off of it. Now it's only in his hands. And can I trust him? So although my mind said, yes, you can trust him, my heart was not convinced of that. And it really was a deep path for me to walk out with him, because our hearts want to. We know he's good, but we don't always know he's good. And the reason, because then I asked him to help me understand, how can it be that my heart doesn't fully trust him when I so desperately want to? And he said to me, it is because of our life experiences. So when we experience any sort of relationship that has really bruised our trust or bruised our heart, caused a lot of soul wounds in us, we automatically start to project that onto him. So then your mind and your mouth says, I believe God, but your heart is like, no, my daddy might not have been the best dad. So can I trust him as a father when my earthly father wasn't good? Or I had a broken relationship with my mom. There's no connection. How can I trust Holy Spirit to be motherly towards me when I've never in earth had an experience with a mother figure that was healthy and good? And broken relationships, marital relationships, it very easily gets projected onto Yeshua because he is our bridegroom. But if we have been, in a very violent or abusive marriage or broken marriage, we start to hesitate to truly surrender to Yeshua's love as our bridegroom because our experience in earth wasn't whole. It wasn't healthy. And we start to project that onto God. And that imprints on us. And it causes our hearts to not fully trust him. And then unless we, like David prayed, place our hearts on the altar. David says, I place my heart on the altar and I wait for your fire to fall upon my life. And show me where there are any iniquity. Show me where there's things in my heart or in my spirit that does not trust you. I love David. I think he had such a phenomenal relationship with Yahweh because he was so vulnerable and he was so transparent with God. Half of the Psalms is about God's glory and the other half is about how he doesn't know if he can trust God. Is it going to come through for him? He was so vulnerable in his Psalms, and I think that's a very big key for us. I often find a lot of healing in Psalms because of just the transparency that David had. And I think sometimes we also struggle with it. So, but, surrendering your heart to him and saying that I want to surrender. So I want to trust you. So I am placing my heart on the altar and I'm allowing you to show me where things have happened in my life that has created a different belief system in my heart than what is in my head and what I am declaring from my mouth. So there's the heart center. And I always say the heart is the seat of our intuition. Now, your intuition isn't something you can just control. Your intuition is something that it's a response. It's a natural spiritual response. So the heart is the seat of our spirit and the seat of our intuition. And then we have the mind. And the mind is where it is the seat of our understanding. So the mind can differ from the heart. Like I just said, you can believe in your mind, you believe God, but your heart can say something different. So I have experienced, I feel Abba said that the mind is the seat of our soul. So you have the seat of your spirit in your heart, and the seat of your soul in your mind. And your mind is your emotional intellect, it is your understanding, it is your thought system, and it is also a belief system. So both of it is your belief systems, although the heart carries a much weightier, heavier belief system, because ultimately, as God says, as you think in your heart, so you will be. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he. It doesn't matter what the mind says. It doesn't matter what the soul says. If it's a certain way in his heart, that is who that man is. Which is also a bit unsobering if we look at it like that, because it really puts an urgency in us. When Abba says, let me search your heart, I don't really care what you say with your mouth, and you can believe one thing, but if your heart is not in alignment with that, that is what I'm searching, because God also says that I know the hearts of man and I search the hearts of man. So I just want to make it clear, this is not a salvation issue, because if we look at how broken people are and how trauma has really affected the generation after generation, and it's starting to escalate because there's no real understanding of it and no spiritual understanding of it, this is not a salvation issue at all. Saying that, I wasn't going to mention it, but I think I should. In my whole journey last year, when my own heart was challenged, God took me to that verse. I think it is in Thessalonians, where he says that work out your salvation with fear and trembling. So I asked him, that is a bit contradictory, but because doesn't Jesus give us our salvation as a free gift when we accept him? And I really experienced how the Spirit said to me that salvation isn't your eternal salvation. It isn't whether you go to heaven or hell, because that is salvation as an eternal life is a gift given by Jesus to us. But when he says, work out your salvation with fear and trembling, I have experienced that as work out your inner peace with fear and trembling, meaning it is our responsibility to lay that our hearts on the altar. It is our responsibility when we experience any sort of brokenness, which neither of us are exempt of. No one. If you are lucky, if you experience only one catastrophe in your life, the chances of us experiencing several broken situations, I mean, like I said, Jesus wasn't even exempt from that. So we can't make that claim, but it is our responsibility to fully surrender and notice, go to him so that he can teach us that our mind and our heart is not in unison. There is no shalom between the two, and that is working out with fear and trembling, because the moment you start going into trauma memories and traumatic events that you would rather just push to the side as if it didn't happen, it can be very scary. And for a lot of people, that is a topic they do not want to touch. They just want to forget it, move on from it. But it causes that dissociation, and ultimately it breaks down our relationship with Yahweh and with Jesus, because now we can't trust him, and we struggle to trust people, never mind God. It's difficult for us to fully surrender and be vulnerable in close, intimate relationships. So if we can't with another person who is here with us be vulnerable and allow vulnerability, then ultimately it is going to affect the way we are vulnerable with Yeshua. And if we are going to trust him enough, and can we be intimate enough with him, if we cannot even recognize it in our human interactions, that is something that we struggle with. So the heart is the seat of the spirit, the mind is the seat of the soul. Sorry, I just want to check my notes that I didn't miss something out. So the dissociation and the fragmentation happens in the soul dimension. Now, I often speak of, when I do my sessions or in our workshops, we can be programmed. Your heart and your mind can be programmed to believe something that is not truth. And it's not always easy for us to recognize it just off the bat, saying like, okay, no, this is a programming. But when we truly sit and we understand that certain responses or certain ways we act in our daily lives doesn't really portray the fullness of Jesus, then it's easier to start to see the programming. And a programming might sound terrible, but ultimately that is what it is. So our soul dimension, our mind, is the first thing, I believe, that gets affected and programmed by traumatic events. So it will flush over into the spiritual dimension, meaning our hearts struggle to trust God. And it will definitely go into the body's dimension, and that's where illnesses and all those things come from. So it is really crucial for us to notice in our soul dimension when there are suppressed triggers or traumas, because if we do not recognize it, in clinical terms, they would say only when you feel it, you can heal it. In my sessions, I very rarely go into the event that happened. I know there are certain counseling and coaching and psychological methods where they take the person back into that traumatic event. I understand why it's done, because it allows the body and the soul to recall that memory, recall that event that happened and everything. So when it's surfaced, you can sort of deal with it. I don't think it's always necessary, in my opinion, to directly go back to that. I think if you are able to build some resilience in people and equip them enough to notice that, then they can do it themselves without someone else forcing them into a corner. Saying, okay, well, we have to go to this so that we can heal this. And I think that's also a main thing where people struggle and don't really want to go into the trauma, is because they feel pushed into a corner because they couldn't deal with what happened in the first place. There's been no resilience built until now, and now you're forcing them to go back to that place. Because, you know, in your brain, what happens in your brain when you recall any sort of trauma, and again, even complex trauma, where if you were in a narcissistic abusive relationship, every time you think of what happened, or think of that person, or think of any sort of experience you had with that person, the body and the hormonal cascades in the body and your mind goes to that place. It goes straight back there to when that happened. And you relive that trauma all over again. So in its essence, if someone has never healed from trauma, for us to take them back to where the trauma happened sometimes is unnecessary, because they already go back there, because in their mind they've never really healed from that. That is also part of dissociation. You know, if someone experienced a trauma or a abusive situation or any sort of thing that happened to them, say when they were 5 years old, and now they are 55, and something happens, and that memory gets triggered. That experience of what happened when they were 5 gets triggered. Now they call that arrested development for a reason, because that person, there's a part of them, the soul that fragmented, the dissociated part of their soul is still stuck in that time and place. So now we have people in our lives and something happens, you have no idea why their response is so, you know, exaggerated. And we say to each other, you're acting like a child. You're acting like a 5-year-old. But the truth of the matter is, it is most likely the 5-year-old responding to that situation. Say, for instance, it was a 5-year-old that was not allowed to speak when something terrible happened. Now, as an adult, when something happens and they feel threatened, they freak out or lash out about that, because that 5-year-old just wants to say, this is not healthy for me, I don't feel good, I don't feel safe, I don't feel. So now we have this exaggerated adult response, acting like a child, and because people don't understand, they would target that child. They would say, you're acting like a child, stop it, sit down, stop it, or don't do this. And I think, you know, it's a very broad thing, and I think for everyone to understand all of this might be a long stretch. But I do really pray that Abba teaches all of us to have some sort of understanding about this, so that when we are in our personal relationships, when something like that happens, that we will not automatically say, oh, stop acting like that, that we would, again, not maybe condone their behavior, especially if it is also hurtful towards you. But so you don't have to accept the behavior, but to extend a bit of grace, understanding and seeing this person is triggered. There is a response that normally this wouldn't be that person. Like in their everyday life, this is not how they act. So why all of a sudden there's this out of character response? And that gives us a bit of a grace and understanding towards other people and our fellow brothers and sisters, you know, the sons of God, that we can cover each other and keep each other and see, okay, I'm not also going to react the way that might have been the response in their childhood. I'm going to rather extend some love, rather extend some grace and forgiveness, time time is often a good thing to extend to that person. Just distance for a little bit, but don't reject and don't abandon. And I think if we all have a safe space to firstly try and see where our own brokenness is and where our own wounds are still seeping, then it's great and it's ideal when you are in a space where other people would also allow you that, and we can allow that to one another, not bleed on each other, but just to have some sort of compassion and understanding as to how the soul fragmentation and the dissociation works, in order for us to just support each other and really just extend some sort of help to one another. Do not worsen that because the fruit of that is going to remain if we can't delve into that. And not having enough safety around you and in relationships around you really does more extensive damage than anything else. And I think Yeshua I said this to someone else the other day as well, I think he is really busy with a deep tissue cleansing in us. A deep tissue. You know, when you go to the cardio or chiro, not cardio, chiro, and they do that deep muscle massages on you, and it's so painful, and you just want to jump up and you don't want to lie there for them to do it. But unless they do it, that muscle is not going to release, and the pain and inflammation will not release. And I think he's busy with that, because we see it in so many people who have all of a sudden feel they cannot cope. Minor stressors become massive things to them. And we'll specifically speak about that, I think, next week when we speak of the body, how to notice that, because it really is, it's a very big thing. You have your trauma, the effects of trauma, and then you've got your trauma responses that manifests physically through the body, and also in our behaviors. But I really do believe that he's allowing all of these things to surface, and his light of glory is really being thrown on us so that we can see that. You know, David says in Psalm 73, he says, one day I was taken into the sanctuaries where the light of God's glory destroyed my distorted perspectives. And that is a verse that I often use when I deal with this, because the light of his glory is something that when it exposes the distortion, the distorted belief systems, the lies that we might believe. But if we are not willing to actually step into that light and allow him to expose it, we might never actually see there are certain things in our heart and soul dimension that is not fully surrendered to him. And I do believe with everything that is happening in the earth and just changes, I am very hopeful. I'm very excited to be part of this generation, because we are seeing things of God's glory and that has never been on earth. I think he has kept his best for last. In all respects to all the saints that have gone before us, I do think that we are a company of people that will burn with his glory, that will literally shine the light and literally shine the light. And next week we might just go in. Michelle, you must stop me if I'm going too far over time. Maybe I'm just going to mention it quickly. I do feel the Spirit sort of stirring it. One of the things that happen when you have been traumatized, or when you experience trauma or suffer from the traumatic memories or suppressed emotions, suppressed memories in your body and in your soul, is it literally lowers the body's frequency. So every organ in us vibrate at a certain frequency. So our human body vibrates at a certain frequency. We have an energy field around us that also carries frequency. And that is how we relate to one another, because the word says, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. Oh, sorry, the different verse, that again. But how does one man know another but by his spirit? So we know each other by our spirits. That's why we can sometimes, you meet someone and you feel, something in me wants to put up a bit of a boundary. I'm not really sure I'm safe with this person. They haven't even said or done anything. You just feel you're not so sure that you want to allow them full access to you. And then you meet other people. At the moment you meet them, you hug, and it's, you're just so comfortable with them. You feel safe with them. And that is because the spirit picks up on each other. So we have an energy field around us, and it sounds very new agey, but it is science. And God says that is your spirit becomes the energy, because He's energy. God is the source of energy. And if He is energy, then we are energy. So your spirit and your heart, they can actually measure that of all the organs and the faculties in the human body, that includes the mind, the heart can be measured with the highest frequency. So they can measure the heart's frequency higher than any other organ or faculty of the human body. And that is because it is the seat of the spirit. So it can be measured. So when we experience that sort of negativity, it can pull the energy, the frequency of your body down. It brings it down. That is also why sickness manifests through the body. If your body vibrates at the ideal frequency it's supposed to, and that is between 62 and 72 megahertz, that is where the healthy human body vibrates at, that is the energy measure. If stress and trauma, eating habits, any other sort of unhealthy habits, all of that plays a part in our body's work. So if there are enough suppressed trauma that causes stress, more stress than you necessarily have to have, then that lowers the body's frequency. So that is one of the reasons why people that have experienced a lot of trauma, they would say, I just don't have the energy to sit with God. I cannot pray. I don't even have the energy to read the word. I can't sit with God. It is because the energy field in the body has been so much lowered because of the trauma and the suppressed stressors, that they do not physically have the energy to just lean into Abba. So it is crucial for us. And I started this topic because of everything that is happening in the earth as well. We've got 5G and then moving on to 6G stuff. It is high tech, a lot of technology, a lot of things that we engage and interface with every day, and all of that has an effect on our physical bodies and on our soul and our mind. I mean, just sitting for, I think they say it's like 15 minutes scrolling through Facebook has got such an effect on the brain and on the emotional state of a person. The emotional state gets affected by how much we interface with this thing. So with all of that said, it is so necessary for us. It is crucial for us to eliminate as much as possible of things that can add to that lowering and actually, I want to say, usurping of our spiritual energy, so that we can lean into God even more and lean into Yeshua. And when He says that it doesn't matter what the world around you looks like, you will stand strong, you will be a high tower, you will be a light. All of that is what we are aiming for. We are reaching for that. And it doesn't matter then what happens in the earth. But if we don't heal that soul wound, it's going to keep bleeding. And ultimately we drain our spiritual energy because of it. And then the other phrases in the word where it says people will collapse because of fear and their hearts will not be strong, that is very much a result of suppressed traumas and unhealed traumas. And when we are not willing to go into certain things that has happened, we just want to push it away, it is going to escalate to a point. And I want to say Abba is allowing this sort of funneling of us to go into that narrow space where he's really starting to press the oil out of us. And by pressing that oil out, we have to press all these other things out as well, because I really believe we can't go into the fullness of what is planned for this generation if we are not willing to be vulnerable enough with him and with ourselves, because healing traumas often means you have to sit with yourself, because suppressed trauma or any sort of thing that might have happened, whether it was your fault or not, shame is a natural attachment to that. We feel shame, although it wasn't even our fault. You were a child, or you've witnessed something that was the actions of other people. It's not your fault. But across the board, 100% of the time, when we go into the hearts of people, there is shame connected to that. And we cannot carry that shame. Yeshua has crucified sin along with shame. And sin, we see sin, we need to repent of something. We can easily notice that, because sin is something that you did wrong, or that was done wrong. Maybe it's in your bloodline, but you're willing to repent for that. So sin is something that you did wrong. Shame is a belief system that something is wrong with you. You see where the difference is? We're quickly to repent of sin because we can notice that easier. But shame, it's not an external expression. It's an internal expression. You internalize that, thinking there's something wrong with me. So if I work with people that have been in narcissistic abusive relationships, and I've got a very, very deep compassion towards people like that, because I've been in one. And it really is a detrimental. There's measures of the narcissistic abuse. You get your narcissistic qualities, and then the scale, I always say, goes like a needle, and when it starts tipping to the side, it is detrimental to the human soul and to the body to have survived the narcissism. And I have lost my train of thought. What was I saying just before that? Can you believe it? I've completely lost my train of thought. But anyway, it is necessary for us to, even when we don't want to, we have to bring that to Abba so that he can heal us of that. Because if we do not heal our hearts, the shame, that was something that I wanted to say. As people that have been in that sort of situations, they feel incredible amounts of shame. They feel it is something that they did wrong, they're not worthy of something. And even in just general complex trauma, if you had a bad relationship with your parents, we might think, I wasn't worthy enough to be loved. I'm not pretty enough. I'm not clever enough. I didn't do well enough in school. I'm not, a sporty person. My dad would have loved me more if I was a boy, or, things like that. That internalizes shame. And we think we're not good enough. And that spills over into literally every decision that we make throughout our life. Every relationship decision, work, what we choose to do with our lives. Michelle, did you want to say something?
No, I wanted to ask if, I don't know if you're still going to talk about it, but just maybe explaining how to start dealing with these things, if you identify with any of it, because I think that's where we're a little lost. Because most of us, I think, can identify with a lot of these things, but where to take it from there. Sorry.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So, I'm gonna just to give some more explanation, or just clear some things up. So the effects of trauma, I'm sure most of us can notice the physical sensations. There's a hypervigilance, there's a dissociation, sleep problems, any sort of health problems, stuff like that. And then you have your trauma responses, which is your 4 main responses. You have your fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So your flight response would be whenever something threatening, when there's a perceived threat, meaning any sort of confrontation or anything that, you know, is a threat to you, you want to flee, you want to get out of it. Your fight is you become a little bit more aggressive, you want to fight back, you know, you jump on your high horse very quickly and we want to defend ourselves. That is your fight response. Your freeze is where you just shut down completely. So something happens or someone is you know, there's a bit of a threatening situation or a conflict with someone, you freeze completely. You don't say anything, you don't move out of the way, but you also don't fight back. That's your freeze. Your fawning is your people pleasing. So you would go over and above what is needed or expected of you to try and please everyone around you, so that if everyone else is happy and calm, then I feel safe. And then you start fawning. You just want to people please. So I do think that those 4 responses is very necessary for us to recognize, because that will depend on what you need to do to just gain some more strength or bravery. So for instance, with the fawning and people pleasing, I think with all of them, but mostly with that, and the freeze response as well. So if you find yourself that you're someone that freezes up and just try and hope it goes away, is boundaries. It is crucial for us to put up boundaries as to what do we allow other people to project onto us, and where are we going to say, this is not my fault, this isn't my responsibility, and I put up boundaries. So that can be very broad. I mean, we can go in there very deeply as to what a boundary can be, but it is, I think, basic boundaries is that you have a voice and you're allowed to say, no, I am not going to accept this. No, I will not allow someone to talk to me like that or treat me like that. Or you know, a boundary with time, for instance, that, you know, sometimes you just give. To put up a boundary and say, you know what I am able to do and willing to do, I will do. But more than that, I'm not going to flush all of my energy to someone else anymore. And it's not because you don't love them. It is just because it is necessary for each of us to have that boundary to say, this is healthy for me and this is not healthy. So if you tend to have a fawn or a freeze response when something potentially threatening happens to you, then that is, I think, one of the key things is to put up about your boundaries. Fight and flight is often the emotional cascades that come with it. So with your fight and your flight responses, people want to either fight and just start attacking, or they want to completely run away, but very emotionally. So a lot of times with that, there would be a large or very deep emotional response coming from that, whether it is anger, whether it is hysteria or something like that. And that can make it a little more complex, because you have to learn to, I want to say, to decipher the situation. So if something is potentially threatening to you, you have to, in that moment, learn. And this is not something that just happens easily with everyone. It is a skill that needs to be developed, that you have to, in that moment, read the circumstances, read the situation, and see that my life is not being threatened. My life is not being threatened. So yes, there's an uncomfortable situation, or there is someone that might be causing this uncomfortable situation. But the truth is that my life is not in danger. And if you have any suppressed traumas from your childhood, the chances are that when, say, for instance, you are married and your husband has a bit of a, you know, just he's maybe more assertive, so he speaks a bit louder. He's not mad at you, and you actually know he's not mad at you, but because you came from a childhood where the father figure or the male figure in the house had a very harsh response to you, you automatically want to do this. So now your husband just raises his voice a little bit and you want to do this, where you have to reprogram yourself. You have to learn, this is the truth of my marriage. This is the truth of this relationship. This person is for me. This person loves me, is good to me. So make a pros and cons. I would often say make your list as to, this is what I experienced in a broken interpersonal relationship when I was a child. This is what my mind, my brain thinks happens when there is a confrontation. But the truth is, my husband is good. He is kind. He is faithful. He is gentle with me. Yes, he's a strong leader, and that can make him assertive. That does not make him violent. So for you to reprogram yourself, you have to sit with that. You have to sit with the emotion that starts to surface when you feel any sense of threatening. And writing it down is such a method of healing. Journaling, writing things, putting it on paper is such a measure of healing because you get it out. You have to allow for it to surface and come up. And then when you put it down on paper, you write it and you write truth of it. You can see the difference because then you can hear and you engage so much of your senses. Because senses is also very important for us to sort of navigate through any experience. And writing it down or journaling is good to reprogram yourself. And then it is crucial to learn in that situation that if you are used to violence and now you automatically want to protect yourself, even though there's no violence coming your way, you have to learn to lean into that scenario. And the truth is, this person is not a threat to me, or my life is not in danger. My life is not being threatened. I am not 5 years old anymore. That is also something that I had to do. I would speak to my own inner child. So I had some personality or some coping mechanisms that I had most of my life. And then I realized this isn't good. I'm very much a fawner. If I've experienced trauma, I want to fawn over people. I'm that one that if everyone else is happy, then I'm safe. And then I would say to me, that's not healthy. That is not healthy. You have no boundaries. And I had to sit. So I asked God, and that is where journaling came in. I asked Abba, show me where did this programming happen? Why am I like this? And it's not necessarily a bad thing. An empath, people are very empathetic. It's not a personality trait. It is something that was cultivated. And the irony of the case is narcissists and empaths, which are drawn to each other, are cultivated in the same circumstances. Just the personality then decides whether they're going to be narcissistic or empathetic. But the initial cause of that is very much the same. So being an empath isn't something that is just part of my personality. No, it's a coping mechanism. It is a skill that you develop. Yes, is it good? For sure. Is it something that God can use? Definitely. But it is also something that can be very detrimental to you because you just give everything of yourself to everybody and you have no boundary. So seeing that and asking Abba, okay, so where did this happen? In your prayer time, sit with him and ask him, show me my life. Where did this programming start happening? I did that. So he showed me at a certain age in my life, I started reading situations a certain way. And I realized, if I can make sure everyone else is in a good mood, then I feel safe. Then I'm cozy and comfortable because I hate conflict and I don't want to be part of that conflicting situation. So make sure everyone else is safe. So now as an adult, for most of my adult life, I did exactly that. But I'm not 7 anymore. You see, I don't have to take responsibility for everybody else's actions. My 7-year-old thought I needed to, but I didn't have to. And as an adult, God said to me, you don't have to. You cannot take responsibility for everyone else's actions. So deprogram yourself. And I was forced to sit with myself. I wrote down, I journaled with God. In prayer, he showed me where it happened in my childhood. A certain event happened, and that's where it sort of escalated from there. And then I decided, okay, what would make me feel safe? What it is, I don't want to give so much energy to other people when they, when they are having a fit. It's not my fault. It's not my responsibility. So since then, every time where there would be a situation where I would normally go into that fawning where, okay, just calm down, be in a good mood, we're all happy, everything is okay. I left it. I forced myself to just step back and say, I'm not the cause of this. This isn't my response. This isn't my problem. Everyone is accountable for their own actions. So yes, I can pray to take I want to say to start govern the spiritual atmosphere, because that is something that God asks us to do. We are sons in his kingdom. We are governors in his kingdom, meaning we can decide what is lawful and what not. But I don't have to surrender to other people's actions. There's a difference. So in prayer, I can pray to take control of the atmosphere and not allow a spirit of strife, because the word also says in Isaiah that a spirit of justice is given to those who turn back the battle at the gates. So we are obligated to take control of the spiritual atmosphere and of things around us, to not allow a spirit of strife or of malevolence or whatever to be entertained. But I don't have to submit to other people's emotional state. You see, there's a difference between the two. So when we start noticing these things, Abba would often put us in situations or allow situations around us to say, okay, how are you going to respond now? And it really is a working out with fear and trembling. You have to sit in that situation, realize this is what I would normally do, but until now it hasn't been healthy for me, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to take a step back, pray shalom in the situation and pray shalom into the relationship, but step back. And that can often be so hard for people, very hard for people to do, because it goes against their programming, it goes against what they're now used to do. But I've learned that one of the best ways to start noticing that programming in the soul's dimension is to journal with God. And also allow him and ask him to show you where has there been dissociation, where has a part of your soul fragmented, where do you maybe act out of a arrested development state instead of being fully present in your adult body and space and realm right now. And as he starts showing that, people would often say, okay, but how do I pray through something like that? Y'shua is so kind. He's so kind and he's so gentle. I'll share a testimony with you. I had an experience where he showed me some trauma in my childhood, arrested development. And I sat on my couch, cried like that 12-year-old that he just showed me that's being triggered. I cried it out, because you have to cry. We'll speak about crying next week, but you have to cry it out. And then I literally sat there on the couch and I asked Y'shua to minister to that part of me. Minister love, minister healing, minister truth to that part of me. And I spoke to myself. I said to my own 12-year-old, you are not 12 anymore. You are not subjected to certain circumstances or environments anymore, or might have ever been. Maybe it was just some sort of fear that came in and I entertained that fear. It never even happened. And to minister to my own soul part, saying that you are safe. Speaking to your own soul part, saying that you are safe. So just saying to yourself, when you feel overwhelmed and you feel there are trauma memories being triggered, to just sit in that space and say, okay, I am safe. I am safe. My life is not in threat. Nothing's going to happen. I am not 5 years old anymore. I do not have control over my circumstances. I'm an adult. I'm loved. I have a support network. I am self-sufficient. Whatever it might be that gives you courage and bravery to speak that out loud, say that, and breathe into that. Breathe into, I am safe. Breathing which again we'll speak of next week, has a way of recalibrating and regenerating the cells, the trauma cells in the body, to actually accept truth and let go of a lie. So speaking that out, really talking into that situation, writing it down, journaling with God. Another big thing to journal, if you've noticed there's a lie. So say, for instance, you were in an abusive relationship with a parent, and they have just spoken hate all over you and death all over you your whole life. That is a lie. That is speaking death is not truth. It's a deception. It's going to cause a deception and a distortion here. But the truth is, God is a faithful Father. God says, come to me when you need help. God says, if you were the only person on earth, I would still send Yeshua to die for you. That is truth, because his word is truth. And his word becomes flesh, because Jesus is the word made flesh. So if we read the word, we speak the word to ourselves constantly, it becomes flesh to our bones. It becomes your belief system. It becomes something that is true to you. And then it sort of dissipates everything else that has happened that was a lie or a distortion. But unless we lean into him and asking him, okay, what happened? I see this. I'm going to counter that with truth. I'm going to counter the lie that I was never good enough with a truth in Hebrews that says, I am perfect, I'm wanted, I am loved. To speak scripture, speak truth, actually becomes flesh to the bones. And I feel in the soul's dimension, there's a lot of skills for the body to release that trauma. But for the soul, it is crucial for us to lean into Abba for that, because our soul and our heart is our belief system. And the only thing that can truly change that and change how we see ourselves and the world around us and remove those filters from our minds would be when we lean into truth and replace the deception or the lie with truth, and that truth is only found in the word. Michelle, is there enough time, or is it up?
So, because it's Sabbath, I normally let people go on as long as they need to. If someone needs to leave and watch the recording afterwards, that's fine. But if you feel in the spirit that you need to go on and speak more on a certain topic or anything, feel free to do so.
Okay. I want to make it or open it up. If there's anyone that might have a question just into a specific direction that you need to, I'd love to answer if anyone has a question. I see there's something in the chat. So let me just open that up. Okay, I'm gonna, Henriette, thank you for your question. Yes, so I want to share something with you that really this is a very real testimony of my own situation, because me speaking into all of this and talking about all of this is not just because I'm fascinated with the concept thereof, but because I wasn't spared of the effects of the trauma. So
Bianca, sorry,
last year.
I just want to read the question, so anyone who didn't read it.
Yeah.
So the question is, would also like to know how to use the word as a kind of medicine to replace the lie with truth for all different situations.
Okay, so I had to walk out quite a journey with anxiety and having some feelings of depression. So, but the anxiety was very real. Like my body started, I would hear of people saying they suffer from anxiety or anxiety attacks, and I never really understood it until one day everything came down on me. And my body started to respond very physically with anxiety. So it would rush through my body. I don't know if anyone has ever experienced some sort of anxiety, but it feels like you literally cannot breathe. And I think that was very much a moment in my life where the rubber hit the tar. I mean, I asked God, okay, if your word says that in Psalms, he literally says, if you feel like you've been kicked in the gut, I will breathe new breath into you. And if you've ever felt anxious, like that level of anxiety or depression, everyone who has ever experienced it to that measure would say it feels like they've been kicked in the gut. It feels like you literally cannot breathe. So I said to Abba, his word has to become life for me. And I think that is what you're asking. How does that become life to us? I was in a very low place. So the only verse once, I don't even know how I got to it, but I read Colossians 1:17, and right at the end of it, the very, very last sentence of that verse says, in him all things hold together. And that gripped my heart. And I realized if nothing else is going to work, I'm going to claim that promise. And it's very much an intentional thing. When we start using the word to for any measure in our hearts, and I'm also a prayer coach, so I love to help people, pray strategy around certain situations. And I think even I was challenged with how much do I believe the word to become flesh to me. So I actually said to Abba in reverence, but in desperation, I said to him, your word needs to become flesh to me. If you say that you heal us from all of this brokenness, if you say that you're close to the broken heart, that you can heal the wounds of those that have been hurt, then it needs to be made manifest. Otherwise, it will always just be a pretty little verse. I know it sounds very condescending. I don't mean it like that, but I was desperate for it to become real to me. So that was all that I prayed. And I want to say that if there's one verse in the Bible that grips your heart in the moment, take that promise, and it is our responsibility to lean into that until it becomes real to us. So I took that verse, in him, all things hold together. When the anxiety would I would feel it start creeping up. I would feel anxious. I can't really breathe. So the first hour of the day would be fine. And then my emotional state will just start to, go down, down, down. I would literally stand up. I'm very big on prophetic actions. I think there's a lot of power to it. So I would literally get up from wherever I was. I would take one step forward. I would see how I step into Yeshua, because the spiritual realm is more real than this earth. The earth is a very dense material. That's why we see it so easily, because it's very dense. It is a fraction. It is a vapor of what really exists. The spirit is more real than the earth. And you can change everything in the earth only by what you do in the spirit. So with that intention, I would stand, I would take a step forward. I would see myself walking through the blood of Christ, standing inside of him, inside of his heart. I saw it as this inner chamber, call it the Holy of Holies or whatever you want to, but I saw myself walking through the blood, standing there, and I declared, in you, I will be held together. It felt in my soul dimension like things are falling apart, but his promise is, in me, all things hold together. I would breathe for a bit, standing there, breathe it, step out. Wouldn't feel different. I'm not going to lie to you. There would be no difference right there. Sometimes I would do it up to 18 times a day. Every hour, I would take a step forward, in you I'm held together. Or I'd pray, your grace is sufficient. For this hour, your grace is sufficient. For this next half an hour, your grace will be sufficient. I took it like as if it's tangible. I decided I'm going to take this because this has to manifest. Otherwise, God is not who he says he is. If his word doesn't become flesh to us, then he's not who he says he is. And I refuse to believe that he's not who he says he is. So I would do that for 3 weeks. 3 weeks I did this every day. Some days I would do it and I would feel a bit better. Some days I would do it 5 times instead of 18 times. But for 3 weeks, I persisted in doing this because I was desperate for life to come from this. And one day, so now I started saying, I step into you and in you I'm held together. And I was sitting on my couch doing some work, and the anxiety started rushing through my body. Everything was starting to manifest with anxiety. I literally closed my eyes and I just said, I am in you, therefore I am held together. You see how the wording changed? And I only realized my wording changed afterwards. But in that moment, I just said, I breathed. I didn't get up and do my normal prophetic action. I just said, I am in you. So I'm held together. And you see how that belief system changed, where at first I thought, I'm outside of him, I have to step in. So there was a bit of a separation belief system. You hear that? I'm outside, I need to step in. When now I am in you. That is my truth. Whether my body feels it right now is not truth. The truth of the matter is, I am in you. It was one of the most real experiences I have had in my life. As soon as I said that, I could feel energy like an electric charge running from my heart space, because remember, that is where your belief system sits. From my heart space, I felt the energy like a lightning run through my legs and something being released from the bottom of my feet. It was so real. And I sat there, and all of a sudden, everything changed. I felt light. I felt I could breathe. I did this. I shook my body like this, thinking like, where's it gone? Like I was so used to the anxiety now. Now it's gone. I don't know where it's gone. Is it gonna come back? So I started shaking my body just to see what's going to happen. And I realized in that moment, my belief system changed. The truth landed in my soul. So we build structures in our soul and in our heart space. A lie can build a structure, and you go into that lie constantly. So you sort of make it your habitation. It's not healthy, it's not good, but it becomes your truth. And if you change that, the word says that the name of Jesus is a strong tower, and those who run into him will be kept safe. He is our strong tower. So I saw, because I sat back down, crying with gratitude of this sudden shift that just happened. And I asked God, because I'm someone that really likes to understand things in the spirit, and I asked him what happened. Like, I'm grateful, but what happened? And I saw in my spirit how the lie that caused the anxiety, every day for that 3 weeks that I did it, I framed a new belief system. And the old one started to crumble. So every day I would, step into him, go lean into him. The lie crumbled until eventually, in that moment where I realized that I am already in him, I don't have to try and search for him, I'm in him already. That lie crumbled. And I saw in the spirit how that structure collapsed and this high tower was erected, risen up, his name. And since then, because that now is my truth. So I'm not going to lie. I am a very emotionally responsive person, meaning I am very empathetic. So I absorb other people's issues very quickly. And that can cause anxiety in me, especially because I do counseling. But when I realize I'm starting to feel anxious, instead of trying to go through the whole system again, my truth now is I am in him. His name is my strong tower. And I lean into that truth. So instead of going, I'm anxious, I'm constantly feeding this anxiety and this fear and this worry and stress, I breathe and I go into him, because the word says I'm safe in him. And then that anxiety gets flushed out of my heart space like that, because I changed what I believed in. So Henry, does that help you with so if there's anything, that's wonderful. If find your promise, find the word and make it real. And if you have to press in it for 3, if there's a lie that causes any sort of distortion in your spirit or soul, that lie didn't come in one day. It was a continuous thing. It was an occurring, repeated thing. You're not good enough. You're not good enough. You're not good enough. So if the lie structure is built over a period of time, then we have to be honest enough to realize, okay, well, the truth, the structure has to be built in us, meaning I'm going to press into that every day. If you are praying for your children, and God says in Isaiah, your children will be, what does Isaiah 60 say? Your children from afar will come in, and the light of God will rise upon you, and the nations will come to you. Kings will come to your glory. If you're praying for children that is not there yet, then you press into that verse. So you take that verse and you say, God, you said, because he establishes the law. That is his spiritual law, and he is accountable to his own law. Meaning, if he says to you, I will make sure that your children will be saved, then that is what you are leaning into. So you take that verse from the Bible, and if you pray nothing else for the next 5 weeks, only that, but you make it real to yourself, you will see the manifestation of it. Even in your own brokenness, God, you say you are close to the brokenhearted. So my heart has been broken. And you know, they say it's a broken heart. You know, people suffer from a broken heart. They can actually physically suffer with illness because of a broken heart. But God says, I'm close to the brokenhearted. So if you feel lonely, then that is your verse. And you take that verse and say, God, you say that you are close to the brokenhearted. So I might not feel it in my soul dimension right now because the pain is overwhelming, but it has to shift. So you take that word and you pray into, God, you are close. Thank you that you're close to me because of my broken heart. You make it personal to yourself. Take that verse and make it personal. God, you say that I will witness the brightness of my own rising. You say that we are being made into your perfect image and glory. That is what you say, and you are the author and the finisher. So I take that Bible verse and I make it real, and you pray with it, literally as if your life depends on it. You pray until it becomes real and tangible to you, and that becomes flesh to the bones. Jesus was the word made flesh. His word becomes flesh to our bones, and we become strong and brave. So yes, I hope that helps. Next question, how does one measure the frequency of the body? You mentioned that the ideal frequency is 62 to 72 megahertz. And does this have anything to do with one's age? This is very interesting. I love this. So the body can be measured through equipment. So there is 2 different sort of equipment that they use now. The one is the body sonic. And the other one, I can never remember the name. I'll get the name and I'll send it to Michelle. Maybe she can just put it on a group. I don't know if you guys are on a group. Yeah. So I'll get the 2 for you. So that is the easiest way to sort of measure it in the earth system. I'm sure there's a lot of other ways, maybe in the spirit with technology, but for now we have equipment in the earth. So this measurement, what they basically do is they literally just, it is quantum physics. A lot of people ask me about it because it sounds very new agey to a lot of people, because now we work with quantum energies and it sounds like the new ages because they are so used to using this language. It is really nothing to be scared of. Quantum physics is something that God created. Physics is something God created and established in the earth. So I do know of a few people that are really, really, really seated in Christ doing all of this. So you can basically go to one of them, or if you know someone with a machine, one of the machines, you literally hold 2 staffs, like iron staffs, and it just starts to measure the frequency in the body. That is how they measure the organs and stuff and see if something is a bit off. The age, I do think that aging affects the frequency, not because of aging, because we actually have a promise in God for the tribe of Asher. One of the inheritances, you know, every tribe had their specific inheritance that they were good at. It was like a gifting or anointing specific to them. And to the tribe of Asher, God said, your strength will equal your days, meaning your strength will be just as equal to your age. It won't go down. You see how there's a distortion in the earth's system where people age and we become weaker. And we so easily say, oh, they're weaker because they're aging. But there's a promise for us as, you know, we, the kainos being, we are different from before Christ. Jesus says, since his resurrection, there's a new generation, a new Adam, a new human, a new mankind, the Kainos generation, or mankind, meaning we carry the fullness of his spirit inside of us. We're the people in the Old Testament, the spirit wasn't embedded in them yet. So they were the 12 tribes. but we are part of Israel. So we have claim to all the inheritances that those 12 tribes had. We have their anointing. We can have their anointings, all 12 of them. That's why we are said to be the 13th tribe, meaning the fullness. We are the order of Melchizedek. So if there's a promise to Asher saying that your strength will equal your days, then it shouldn't be that we lose our strength as we age. So although I do think at the moment there is a thing where the body's frequency gets lowered because of aging, I do think it is something that needs to be redeemed and restored in the earth. I believe if God said you can be just as strong, meaning just as healthy at an advanced age as you were at a young age, then there shouldn't be a difference. So the way, like I said, emotional trauma or suppressed stressors and traumas, that can affect our frequency and lower it. External stress, work stress, maybe relationships, stuff like that can also bring it down. So that's why they say stress is one of the leading causes of heart diseases and stuff like that, because the stress brings down the body's frequency. You know, if you, so optimally, our body shouldn't function lower than 62 megahertz. If your body goes down to 59 megahertz, cold symptoms start to show. 58 megahertz, flu symptoms start to show. Go down, go down, go down. A body that has cancer functions just above 30 megahertz and lower. It can be anything from 32 megahertz and lower. And that's why people die of cancer, because it literally eats the body. It draws all that energy down, frequency down, and the body starts losing energy to fight. There's not enough fight in them anymore. And then they die. So things like the food we eat, next week we can also go into this a bit more, but what we put into our body affects your emotional state. You know, if you only eat sweet stuff and drink a lot of coffee, although coffee can be good, I'm not someone to say don't drink coffee. I think there's benefits to coffee, but drinking only that, eating a lot of GMO stuff that does not carry frequency, because food also carries a frequency, and processed food has no frequency, zero, zilch. If they try testing it, it literally says zero. Processed food does not have any frequency in. So we can say at least it's got some vitamins, and it does not. If it's been processed, all that vitamins means absolutely nothing to you. So you have to take responsibility to eat foods that have higher frequency. Vegetables, fruits, meat. Everyone doesn't have to eat meat if they don't choose to, but it is proven to raise the body's frequency. Someone that suffers from depression, it can worsen the depressive state by not eating a healthy breakfast. And with healthy, eggs, carbs, which everyone is trying to avoid, eating carbs like a healthy bread, artisanal bread, you know, breads that was made from a good source, eggs, avocados, fish, stuff like that. Someone that suffers from depression, it is vital for them to eat a healthy, fat-rich, protein-rich breakfast. And they have clinically proven that people that suffer from depression and change their diet to eating more proteins and more healthy fats, they could actually overcome depression simply by doing that. Just changing their diet and eating nutritional foods that raised the body's frequency. So yeah, Melissa, I think it doesn't have to be. I think it is something in the moment that a lot of what we experience, external factors affect it. I do believe that God is going to give us the strength of Asher, so that as we age, we don't have to grow weaker, and the body's frequency shouldn't go down at all. Yeah.
Bianca, I also have a question. So does exercise and everything also affect your frequency?
Yes, absolutely. It does, definitely. It is vital for us to do exercises. It doesn't have to be strenuous exercise. You don't have to go to the gym every day or even do weights exercises. something that I myself do, and it has really changed so much. And I started doing this because of the anxiety and the depression that I had to work through or navigate through, is somatic exercises. So your soma is your emotional body, I want to say, inside of you. That's your soma. So somatic just means these exercises that engages the soma, your emotional body inside of you. So that includes a lot of breathing, but Michelle, if it will be okay, then I'm going to go into details about this next week, because it does go with the body. So I'm going to mention it now, but I'll give you guys some more details surrounding it and tips, and just some exercises, show you how to do some exercises to actually help this. But yes, somatic exercises, it is actually just basically stretches where you really focus on how you breathe. The breath of God it heals us. His breath heals us. And so to focus on how we breathe can actually engage with our emotional body and our emotional responses. Doing exercises like walking, it's if anyone has ever noticed that if you feel down and you do just 20 to 30 minutes of light exercise, just some stretches, stretch your lungs open so that you can inhale a bit better, go for a walk outside, specifically in nature. If you can do some sort of exercise in nature, it is so vital for our mental health and well-being. And it does allow the body to work through trauma memories in the cells. So it does really strengthen you. It gives you any resilience. It's contrary. If we think of resilience, we think strong and brave, and there's a strength that resilience is actually shalom. Resilience is peace, shalom. So if you have enough resilience, it means you encapsulate enough calmness, enough shalom, enough peace inside of you, that whatever comes from the outside, you can work through it easier. You can actually just dissipate all the stresses around you, because you hold shalom and peace inside of you. And exercise is good to do that. Getting outside before 10 a.m. in the morning, the frequency of the light, the measure of the light in the morning before 10, and the same when you sit and look at a campfire, like a bonfire. That's why everyone loves sitting looking at a bonfire. I mean, who does not enjoy a bonfire? Do you know why? Because it actually triggers a part of the brain where you engage in shalom, where you go into peace. Same with if you go for a walk outside before 10 a.m. in the morning, the measure of light engages a part of you where your body automatic goes into a place of peace and rest. So yes, light exercises at least 3 times a week. It's very good. I'm just reading through some of the... Henry, it says, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Yes, it is in Philippians 2, verse 12 to 13 for those that wanted it. So yes, I do think that next week I'm excited to go, because I love how the body responds to healing. It can respond to the trauma and the wounding, but it can also majorly respond to the healing. So I think next week there's also interlinked. You cannot, like I say, you cannot separate the two. If you focus only on the body and you don't do nothing about reframing what you believe and actually adapting to the mind of Christ, because there's a reason why he says, take every thought captive. And that is also a very big key to do, is if you know there are things that you need to work through. If you know that there has been things spoken over you, you have believed lies, and you can identify that lie, this is not truth. Whenever a thought comes in saying to you, you see you're not good enough, you're not cute enough, you're not this, you're not that. Yeshua says, and I love the way the Passion Translation says it, he says, take every thought captive as prisoners of war of Christ. That is how serious he says it. Every thought has to be taken captive as a prisoner of war, meaning we cannot play around with what we believe. If there's a lie, we have to wage war against it, because it is going to affect the way we see ourselves and Christ. And ultimately, that affects the relationship we have with Christ. And that is not something that we want to play with. Again, it might not be a salvation issue. I mean, sometimes it is. A lot of people don't believe in him because of the trauma. So they refuse to lean into Christ because where was he? Where was he when this happened? And that is a very deep thing to go in for a lot of people, is that they start to project their anger onto him, and that it really is healing. But it is really waging a war that we have to take responsibility as to what we believe. And when we identify that lie, or if we identify that, goodness, I go into this programming where I just want to please everybody so that I feel safe, that means I do not live out the fullness. And I listened to a podcast of, I think it was Dr. Gabor Matai. He's a Jewish clinical psychologist. He is absolutely phenomenal, like brilliant. And he says that they can clinically prove that depression is actually just a fruit of not being authentic, not being able to be authentic. Meaning, if you suffer from a depression, yes, obviously there can be stuff that has happened and your nervous system is just starting to collapse under that. So we'll speak about the nervous system in the body next week, but your nervous system will eventually just start waning under all of the traumas, all of the hurts, all of the brokenness. But they say clinically they can now statistically prove that everyone that suffers from severe depression in one form or another believe that they are not allowed to be their true authentic self. They were forced to be something that they don't want to be. They were forced to do stuff they didn't want to do. You see how all of that causes inauthenticity. So eventually they don't know who they are. My dad forced me to do this sport. My mom forced me to be this way. I had to be quiet when I'm actually a very outspoken person. I was forced to be quiet. Everyone always tells me, don't be so loud, don't be so this, don't be so that. You see how much damage that can cause to someone's identity, because now they have to adhere to everyone's demands of them. And that leads to depression, meaning you have to be something that you are authentically not. And that causes a break in your identity. And that's why people that suffer from depression would say, I don't know who I am. I don't recognize myself anymore. I mean, these are very real statements just in a clinical field, the psychology field. But in the soul, that is what has happened. They have dissociated from their true identity so much that now they suffer from depression in the earth realm. Michelle, you asked addictions, belief systems. Is there anything regarding this that you can explain a bit also? Yes. So are you asking about like people that are addicted to substances and stuff like that? Yes. So addictions are very much people that have dissociated of truth and shalom, I want to say, of peace in such a way that they carry so much bruising, soul wounds, believing something that they truly are not, that they become self-destructive. So although that self-destruction leads to much chaos and a lot of destruction for the family members, for everyone else around them, ultimately what is happening in their soul dimension is they have removed themselves from the truth of what Jesus has called them to be, and have accepted the lie and really have embraced death and lies in such a way that they become self-destructive. So we would look at them and say, well, they must just make better life choices. Leave that. Leave whatever substance you're abusing. Your life will be better. They do not function like that. There has been a break in the synapses in the brain. They can actually clinically prove this, that people with severe addiction problems, and I want to sort of separate smoking from this, because smoking and comfort eating, although addiction, there's a bit of a other mechanic to that. But if we talk from anything from alcohol to drugs to prescription medication, They have become self-destructive. So the belief system in them is so deeply rooted that they are not wanted, they are of no good to this world, they are not loved, they will never be anything successful in their life. That has become such an identity and such a belief system that you can say to them, this is unhealthy, please stop it. They do not recognize that. They do not recognize I'm hurting the people around me, because their own brokenness and soul wounds are so deeply rooted that it consumes them completely. Their pain consumes them. So they cannot see what their actions are doing to other people. And then that frustrates the people standing on the outside. And it is very complicated to work with people like this. And you know, that's why there are people working with people that have severe addictions, because everyone can't just do that, especially if you're very close to the situation, but they cannot see their pain. Same with people that have suicidal tendencies. They cannot see the pain they are causing because they are so consumed by their own hurt. And that lie have really sort of, I want to say, it's like an octopus with a tentacle. It has wrapped itself around them so tightly and so much that they cannot see truth easily. It really is a healing journey for them. So as detrimental as it is for relationships and the people around them, it really is something that they truly believe. And unless that belief system gets healed and changed, they might never step away from that lifestyle. And I want to add with what we just said about how we can ourselves read the word and establish a new belief system inside of us. You can do that for other people. You can, especially if you're in relationship with that person one way or another, it's a family member, it's a close friend, and they have in one way or another, because we're not into witchcraft, so we can't just do things without people's sort of, you know, you can't just manipulate people into even being healthy. That's manipulation. But if there is any sort of relationship with that person or any sort of agreement that they have allowed you to speak into their lives, then in the spirit you have permission. You have permission to speak into that person's life. So you can, in the spirit, I often say to people, don't go into the soul to try and fix their soul, hoping they would make different decisions. It's not going to work. You have to speak to their spirit, man, because the spirit, God said, I have given you all things pertaining to life and godliness to walk in victory. But all of that has been deposited into the spirit. The spirit offers it to the soul offers it to the body. So if the soul is stuck in that woundedness, speaking to the soul is not going to do much of a difference. Most likely nothing at all, especially in very severe cases. But speaking to the spirit is something different, because the spirit needs to be called to remembrance, that this is the truth of God. So the same way you would take a verse and change your own belief system in yourself, you can speak into that person if they have given you permission in their lives to speak into their life in one way or another. In the spirit, I would go to God and say, through the blood of Christ and in love, because I'm loved, and you say you want everyone to be healed and whole, I'm stepping into that commission that you have all ordered us to be our brother's keepers, and I'm speaking to the spirit of that person. So I don't know if you know Arthur Burke. He's very renowned for doing this, where he would call the spirit man to attention and speak into that. So you speak into the spirit. So I bless this person's spirit. Say their name. And I bless the spirit. You know, the word blessing means to impart something, to deposit something. So if I say, I bless you with shalom, it means I give to you shalom. In the spirit, I offer you a gift. I impart it into you. So if you think of it like that, and you pray for someone and you say, I bless this person with strength. I bless him with bravery. I bless him with a kindness. I bless him with self-control. I bless him to have eyes to see, ears to hear, and a heart to understand what the Spirit of the Lord is doing. You are imparting skills into that person's spirit, which initially they have, because God said, I have deposited everything into you. But because of the brokenness of the soul and these two interlinking, if there is too much broken information coming to the spirit becomes weak. It becomes weak. So David says in one of his Psalms, my spirit was so weak, my soul had to carry it. I mean, that is intense if his soul had to carry his spirit because the spirit was so weak because of all the trauma that he constantly witnessed and all the brokenness that he himself had. So, if you bless the person's spirit man with something, you strengthen that spirit and you remind him that God has given you all things to pertaining to life and godliness. God has given you the strength and the bravery to overcome addiction. If you know what happened in that person's life that sort of rolled into where they are at this moment, to speak that, yes, you might have experienced this in the earth, but Spirit man, I bless you to remember the truth of God, that He is a faithful Father, that He will never leave you and He will never forsake you. Speak that truth into the spirit of that person. And then in my, where I would have done this, I would order the Spirit to give that information to the soul, because that is His realm and His dimension. That is His humanity that He governs. The Spirit needs to govern our humanity. So if I bless a person's spirit and I say to that spirit, give that information to your soul. The soul needs to hear this. The soul needs to feed on this, not on the broken information coming from the external factors. It needs to feed on what the Spirit gives. And the Spirit says, I've given you all things pertaining to life and godliness. And then to give the Spirit that, order it in love and grace. We follow what Holy Spirit says, but in my experiences, He has said, now command the Spirit to give it to the soul. That is how you keep your brother. We are spirit beings that have a soul in a body. We are not soul. That is not our core identity. We are spirit. So speaking to one another in the Spirit and bless each other, and speaking life into that, portraying it to the soul. Yes, that is one way of how we can pray for people in that sort of circumstances. Did that answer? Henriette, thank you. Wonderful info. Looking forward to the next one. Oh, thank you, Henriette. It's wonderful to be able to share all of this.
I think if there's not any other questions, we can just what's up slide close. So if there's anyone that still wants to ask a question, otherwise, Bianca, thank you so much for your time, especially now it's been 2 hours. So thank you so much for just stewarding your time with us today. And
thank you.
I know this message will impact a lot of people. I've seen that a lot of people choose to watch the recordings just because that they also they planned it differently. So thank you so much for sharing this. And I just want to bless this video as well, that the seed may fall on ready ground, and that Abba will water it and that it will grow and yield fruit, and also for you to share it may yield fruit in your life as well. And then Shabbat Shalom to everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was such an honor and really a privilege for me to be able to share this. And I'm looking forward to next week. If you don't mind, I just want to, not maybe an official prayer, but I really just want to release that all of this and everything that Abba is doing, that there will be a safety that His Spirit creates around you, each one of you, and everyone is going to listen to this, that you will find safety in Him, and be willing, be brave enough to say, okay, there are things in my life and in my heart space that might not be the fullness of who He is and what I can be and the freedom that I'm able to walk in. And I really do pray for each one of you and everyone going to listen, that you will feel that safety in His Spirit and that He will lead you. He's gracious, He's kind, there's no cruelty in Jesus. He is just safe, so that He will lead you. And if there are, I'm really hoping there would be some testimonies next week, maybe. If anyone starts to feel that they need to sort of press into and lean into Him this week in regarding to some belief systems and trauma, suppressed traumas, that I really do pray that He would keep you and that you will feel safe, and that there would be a transformation in just a few days. He's able to do that. So bless each one of you, and thank you for the platform that you have created. May Abba really also bless and return to you a hundredfold harvest for what you're doing.
Thank you. I'm just going to end
Okay.
the recording, and then we can